Webhooks are something that as you progress in your career or in web development in general, you start to learn about. So in this video, we're going to be covering what webhooks are and how you use them. So let's start with the important question. What are webhooks? Well, you can think of webhooks as a reverse API. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, usually when you interact with an API, you personally make a request from your application, whether that's somebody clicks a button or some sort of interactability happens, a page loads, whatever it might be, and you sort of pull the data down from somewhere. With a webhook, what actually happens is an application pushes some data to a URL that you specify, and then your application needs to handle that in a specific way. So instead of pulling the data down and sort of requesting the information that you need, it's getting pushed to your application. So maybe I can explain that a bit better. So let's draw a quick diagram here. So here we have your application, and then over here we have some sort of service, right? So let's just put some text here and say application. And over here, we have our service. So there we have basically the two pieces that we need. So in the normal API world, what you do is you kind of say, hey, I need this data. And you kind of pull the data in and it gets pushed back. With a webhook, it works a bit differently. So if we just grab this like this, copy it down and paste it, drop it here. And then we get rid of this error right here because we're not making any requests. What happens is this service, this could be Stripe, this could be Clerk, this could be whatever kind of application that you may be using that uses webhooks, is essentially sending you back information. Now, a great example of this is when you create a new user. For example, in Clerk, we have this webhook functionality that says when you create a new user or a user gets updated or a session expires, a bunch of different things, send to a specific URL so they can handle it. I need to fill some database information when a user is created. So with this webhook, you can push that data along and it says, hey, this user was just created, and then you can maybe update your database. Another example could be if you're using Stripe. When a user pays for your product, let's say it's a subscription for your latest SaaS product, it's not happening on your website, it's happening out through the checkout on Stripe. And when they hit submit, then Stripe will send you this webhook that says, hey, by the way, Steve Jones over here just paid for the subscription, so you should allow him to do whatever you want. Then in that case, in turn, you have to then update your application or your logic or your database or whatever and say, yep, Steve Jones has paid his monthly dues. Please make sure that he has access to this secret page. So that gives you a brief explanation of what webhooks are and why you might use them. But what if we saw a practical example? So here we have a very basic implementation of what a webhook could look like. Here we have a handler that says console.log request.body. We're updating some data in a database, but we're just going to log that out. And then we're just going to say we got the webhook as the name. Now, this is a very basic implementation, and I'm just using Next.js APIs as an example, and you can totally handle this with an API route from Next.js. So now we have that, we should actually use this webhook somewhere. Now, the problem with creating webhooks and testing locally is you're using localhost here, but you need access to the outside world to make this happen. So you have a few different options for services here. You can use ngrok, which I don't particularly like. You can use local tunnel, which I absolutely love. And you can also use webhook.site to just test out what happens when a webhook is sent to you. So first, let's do webhook.site so that you can see how a webhook would work in general. So when you go to webhook.site, it's going to give you a unique URL right here. And you can use this however you want. So I'm going to copy this to our clipboard, and I'm going to use Clerk to send us some webhooks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to clerk.dev, and I'm going to go ahead and log into the dashboard. And we'll go ahead and use this Skillshare from yesterday's live stream, and we're going to click this webhooks button right here. Now it's going to load in our webhook handler here, and we just need to add the endpoint. So we'll go ahead and add an endpoint here and hit create. Now this is fully functional and can be used now. So under testing here, I can actually test a few events. So a good example would be user created, because that gives you some sort of data with a bunch of stuff. And as you can see here, there's a bunch of data in here: birthday, created email addresses, blah, blah, blah. It's a giant object with a bunch of things. So I'm going to go ahead and send this example. And then what's going to happen down here is this event is going to be sent, and we should see something appear here. And as you can see, there was an event here that happened, and you can see that this raw data is everything in that example. So now we need to do something, because this event has happened outside of our system, and it says, hey, now you need to do something with this, whether that's you log it out or send it to a database or do something with it. You have to do something with this event. So now we can actually test this in a local host and see what happens. So you can see that just this is what happens when a webhook gets sent. You can see there's a bunch of raw data that you may or may not need to handle. So I'm going to update this one more time, but first I'm going to use Local Tunnel to do this. Now, if you've never seen Local Tunnel before, it's one of my favorite features. It essentially allows you to expose just like ngrok, but there's no login requirements and there's no time limit. So it just starts and it can run forever on a local port. So to use it, you just do npx local tunnel port, or if you install it globally, you can use it however you want. So I use this LT --port 8000. So we can go to our terminal here, and then we can actually add this in. So first we need to do yarn dev. So we got yarn dev running. Now we need to go to our other one and type LT --port and then 3000, because that's what our Next.js app is on. And then you'll be given a URL here. So we can take this URL, copy it, go here, edit our URL so that we can change it to API/webhook and hit save. So now our application here that we've been using can now be tested to see what happens. So if I run this now and just go ahead and hit send example, and as you can see, now we have logged out this data because that's what we got sent. So now we could do, this is where we could be updating our database or wherever we need it in our application. So just to give you a better example, we could grab the data. So it comes in data, and that comes from request.body. And we can say console.log updating database with, put comma here and put data dot, and then let's pick out something here. Let's say data dot first underscore name. Hit save, and then I can send another test, and we can see what happens. So we go back to our dashboard here, hit send example, and there we have it. It's now saying updating database with example, which is our first name, which we can see here. So at this point, you have access to all sorts of information. So in Clerk's World, for example, you now have access to the user ID, which you can find here under ID, which means you could go to your database and update your user's information. Or if this was something for Stripe, it would probably have some sort of Stripe ID that has the email that you could then attach to your databases. So there you have a brief explanation of webhooks. If you're interested in the Jamstack and Astro, check out this video I did on Astro 1.0. It was really exciting to see all these cool new features. And of course, subscribe to the channel for more content.